My name is Cheryl. I'm from Akron, Ohio. I have 9 years in recovery from alcoholism. Today I am an attorney, a mother, a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a very devout Christian. My faith is very important to me.
Well, thanks so much for coming out and joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time. If you could start off by sharing a bit about your childhood.
Yeah. I had what I would call the perfect childhood. I grew up in a very loving Christian home. My parents were both dentists and very well off. I had everything you could ever want and need. Nice house, private school education. I played sports. I had a very loving, very large family. And so we're all very close. And so I would say I really kind of had the perfect upbringing. Nothing that I would say predisposed me to alcoholism. Nothing terrible happened to me. So alcohol really didn't come into my life as far as something that was abusive in any way until I was married and had my second child. So at that point, I was kind of looking for something to do with myself. I had been working as an attorney for, most of my career up to that point in time. And when I say I had my second child, I was in my mid-30s. So unlike most people who start drinking when I think they're in high school or college, it was later in life. It was in my mid-30s. And I had worked, but I decided I was going to stay home with my daughter, my children. And it was very, very difficult for me. I had never stayed home. I had never even really been around kids, and so I was anxious about that whole thing. And I decided, well, it would be a really good idea for me to try to find some friends, some other moms with young children, and I'll connect with some play groups, which I did. And I showed up to the first play group that I signed up for, which is actually through my church, of all the things. And I went there, and the woman who was the hostess offered me a glass of wine. And I thought, I was stunned that anyone would, drink in the middle of the day, and that they would offer that to me. So I said yes because I wanted to fit in. And as soon as I took a drink, it was game on. I felt warm, I felt happy, all of my anxiety about being in a completely different world just faded away. And I fell in love with it right away. And so that was kind of the beginning of my drinking career, because at that point then, it became, I would say, like my part-time job, my hobby, to start researching wine, brands of wine, I guess you would call them, and I started collecting. I started subscribing to magazines. I started going to wine events. I brought my husband into it at that point, and we started going to all these wine tastings. And like I said, it kind of became a hobby.
Yeah.
And it certainly then later became a habit. The game changer for me was that in 2010, and then over the course of the next few years, a series of very, very challenging things happened in my life that were not, they were outside of my control. Number one, my daughter, who at that point in time was 11, was injured, very seriously injured in a sledding accident. At that point, I had gone back to work full-time in my chosen profession. I was an attorney. I was working in Cleveland for the Attorney General's office, and so I had gone back to work full-time. And I got the phone call that no parent ever wants to get from the sheriff of Summit County, who had told me that my daughter, who had gone sledding with some friends, had been seriously injured, and she was being transported to Akron Children's Hospital. I needed to come right away. And of course, they had already contacted my husband, who was home, and just happened to be home. It was over the holidays, and so I got to the hospital, and I realized right away, as soon as I got there and saw her, they were cutting her out of her her snow outfit, and I realized that my life was never going to be the same. She had to have a surgery. She had to go through months and months of therapy and rehab. And of course, as a young child, she was very dependent on me, her mom. I was sleeping with her and caring for her 24/7, all the while trying to work. And so in order to cope with that situation, I once again turned to alcohol. And that's when drinking became definitely a 24/7 proposition for me, full time. From the moment I woke up, in the car on the way to work, I kept a bottle in my drawer at work, on the way home, and then it just continued, and it just never stopped. It was just what I had to do to cope and to make it. Many people at that point had called me out on my behavior. I did all the things that you think of that people do when they're drinking. I misbehaved at family events. My behavior was embarrassing. I smelled of alcohol. I was loud. I was obnoxious. And I knew, and behind closed doors, I was doing things that I was not proud of. I remember stealing alcohol from a store because I was just so desperate. I was not showing up for my kids' events because I couldn't get in the car and drive there.
Right.
You know,
right.
I knew I was drunk. I knew I shouldn't be driving, so I just wouldn't go to their events. And when I did go, I was embarrassment. And so my life had definitely become very, very unmanageable. And it definitely was experiencing the consequences of alcohol at that point in time. And my husband confronted me and said, it's either us or your alcohol. It's either me and the kids or your alcohol. And he had called the insurance company and done some research on where I could go for rehab to get some help, and presented me with an ultimatum. Either you go check yourself in to Edwin Shaw, which was a local recovery center, or we're going to leave and you can figure this out on your own. And you didn't have to tell me twice. That was a wake-up call.
Yeah.
And so I went directly that day to Edwin Shaw, got an assessment, qualified for the program, of course, and went through their intensive outpatient treatment program, aftercare, all the things, and was very, very successful in that program. Eventually graduated, and I embraced recovery. I got involved in a local 12-step program. I got a sponsor. I had a home group. And at the end of that year, unfortunately, my daughter, who at that point was 15 or 16, and she experienced another episode with her leg that she had injured, 5 years before that. And we tried physical therapy, but ultimately she had to have another surgery.
Oh.
And so, of course, I told myself, I'm catapulted back to the trauma of that original situation, and thinking, well, how am I going to cope with this? Oh no, here we go again. Poor me. I'm the victim. Not thinking about my daughter and everything that she's suffering. And so she had that surgery, and even though it wasn't as maybe serious as the first one, for whatever reason, I decided that was a good reason to take a pause from my recovery program, and that I didn't need to go to meetings anymore. I didn't need to meet with my sponsor. And by the way, I could start drinking again because I was cured. I've been sober for almost a year, proven to myself that I could drink like a normal person, whatever that is, and that I'm cured now. Not understanding at all the permanent nature of this disease, that there's no cure, that once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic, that I could never pick back up again, that I would just pick up right where I left off, and one thing would lead to another. So not recognizing that, I decided that it would be okay to pick up again. And I did that secretly, privately, because I knew my family would be upset about that. They had already told me, if you ever drink again, that's it. We're out of here, and, we never want to see you again, kind of thing. You've had your chance, and, don't try it again. So I guess I forgot all about that because I decided to pick up again. And little did I know that my family started to notice that I was off. Maybe they noticed that I was, not myself, and that I'd kind of abandoned my recovery program, my behavior. And one morning, my daughter woke up and, sensing that something was off with me, and she opened up the cabinet in the bathroom where I was hiding my alcohol and found my bottles. Went to tell my husband, and very literally in 5 minutes, I was thrown out of the house. I was out in the front yard with nothing but my keys and my phone, and told, don't ever come back. We never want to see you again. We told you what would happen if you ever picked up again, and so don't come back. Don't come back.
It's devastating.
It was devastating.
Yeah.
It was very devastating. And I remember there was a winter snowstorm, and I was just laying out there in the snow, and through broken glasses at that point, and thinking, what on earth have I done? You've done it now. And not even knowing where to turn, what to do. So, but really literally at that, what I will say, rock bottom moment, I learned that God, my higher power, was with me, because I got my car and I drove down the street and trying to figure out what to do, and I called the 1-800, I guess the emergency hotline, I'll say, at my church, and not knowing what else to do. And the gentleman who picked up on the other end, who was also a good friend of mine, someone that I had known for a very long time, he was also the director of our Celebrate Recovery program at the church. And so I explained what had happened, and he was extremely sympathetic and supportive, and said, I tell you what, if you will take yourself back to detox, get some help for yourself. When you get out, call me, let me know, and we will be there and we will help you. And so they convinced me that it would be okay. And so I got out of detox. I didn't have a place to go, didn't have anywhere to live. But thankfully, the very nice social workers at the hospital were able to find a sober house for me, a local sober house. Went there and I stayed for a little while, and I was also able to get my job back on a probationary basis. And so I had a place to live, and I had my job back, and I also had been, assessed back into treatment. And so I got back into treatment at St. Thomas Hospital in Akron. And there I met just a fantastic group of people, a counseling staff that really helped me to understand that I have a disease. I'm not going to graduate. I'm not going to get better. And that if I'm going to recover, that I have to treat this just like any other terminal illness, whether it's cancer or diabetes, and that I have to take my pill every day. And my daily pill was going to be my recovery program. And that I was going to have to commit myself to a daily program, not temporarily, not something that I just did for a day or a week or for a year, but on a lifelong basis. And so I got back into 12-step programs, got a new sponsor, embraced this treatment program that I was in, got into a professionals aftercare program with other lawyers who were struggling with substance abuse, and I found a whole new community. And at that point, my family still didn't want to have anything to do with me. My son, who was in college at that time, he was very, very supportive of me. So I will say, of all the people in my family, he was supportive of me, and he was encouraging of me. And I will always, always, always appreciate that. And I tell him all the time, you were one of the angels in my early recovery, because when no one thought that I could do it, you were behind me. And so I was always grateful for him. But he wasn't really in the thick of things at that time, and he had his own life. But my husband and my daughter, my husband was, I think, very afraid of me. He was willing to be around me on a very limited basis, but my daughter wanted nothing to do with me. She had experienced the trauma of my behavior, I think most of all, because she was in the home. So, at this point, we're late in 2015, and I decided that I was going to go to Rome, Italy, on a missions trip with some friends of mine from church. And when I was on this trip, I got an email from a local judge who didn't know me personally, but she had, through a friend of a friend, just heard about me, and that I had had a legal career, and that I had done some work for the courts, and she had an opening, and somebody had given her my resume. Mm-hmm. And she got a hold of this resume and emailed me and said, I have an opening. I'd really love to talk to you about coming to work for me. And I just thought, you gotta be kidding me. She doesn't know me. She doesn't know what I've done to my life. I'm damaged goods. And I just told myself that I was not ever going to be I was never going to be able to go back to my chosen profession, to being an attorney. So I had told myself that lie. And so I went ahead and I went through that interview, and I told her I would think about it. And at 5 o'clock that afternoon, I got a phone call from her saying, well, guess what? I called your boss and I resigned you from your job, and you're going to come to work for me starting. And she gave me my start date. And I just thought, oh my gosh, what has just happened to me?
Right.
And when I did share with her, I did start working for her, and eventually did share with her my story, and she thought it was the greatest thing ever. What I thought was the biggest mistake of my life, she thought was the greatest thing, because she saw someone who maybe could relate to some of the criminals and the people who were struggling with alcoholism who were coming into the court, and that I could relate to them, and that I could be, of help to her. So, what I thought was, like I said, the biggest train wreck, the biggest mistake that I had ever made, really had a purpose at that moment. And I began to see myself in a completely new light, and that maybe I did have a future. And so I started that job, and I stayed with her, and she actually moved to a different court. And when we got to that court, this was the Summit County Domestic Relations Court, she appointed me as a magistrate, which I never imagined myself being a judicial officer, holding hearings, being having that level of responsibility.
Right.
And a very high honor. And then eventually asked me if I would handle the substance use docket for our Family Recovery Court program, where I had an opportunity then to help others struggling with substance use, people who had lost custody of their kids or were struggling with their relationship with their former spouse, whatever it would be, to help them, using my experience, strength, and hope that I had gained and what I had learned to actually help others who were in my courtroom.
Yeah.
And so, long story short then, I guess all that to say is, I was put in this very unique, because of my experience, which I would have said was my biggest mistake. I was able to see that I still could be useful, that I could have a purpose, that I could give back to the recovery community, and I could give hope to other people who were hurting. And that's what I would tell everyone who would come into my courtroom in this program. I would just say, one thing that I can give you is hope that there is a better life, hope that recovery is possible, that if you'll do all these things that we're asking you to do, that you will get better. And that I'm a living example of that. I had that lived experience. I've also a volunteer at Restore Addiction Recovery in Lakemore, and so I feel like serving and giving back to the recovery community, to those who are, I was a beneficiary of some great recovery programs, and if other people hadn't volunteered and served in those roles, I would not have recovered.
Yeah.
And so I recognize that, and I want to give back to those organizations, not just the ones that helped me, but to those that are helping the community. And I want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Rather than curse the darkness, I want to light a candle. And so, and then it also just gives me something to do. I'm divorced now. Both of my children are grown and married and gone. And so it really helps me to sink my teeth. It fills my time, but it's also just filling my time with fulfilling activities. So. And I really don't think that I could also talk about this whole side of my experience without also mentioning that in 2016, my daughter and I reconciled after a year and a half of separation from one another, just kind of letting her go and living her life and praying for her and praying that her life would get better and that her heart would heal. It did, and she sought me out. She came to see me where I was, and we were able to reestablish our relationship. And so, today I have a very good relationship with both my children. With my daughter, that relationship was healed. But my son still lives in Chicago, and my daughter just got married. And so I had the privilege of being able to see her graduate from high school. I had the privilege of seeing her graduate from college. Both my kids graduate from college, of being an integral part of their weddings, having the restoration of those relationships also, I don't take them for granted, and investing in those relationships on a daily basis is super important to me now, because I did lose them. I really did. And it's only because of God's grace that I got them back. And so I treat them very, they are treasures in my life. And so just maintaining those relationships, even if it's just a text message or a phone call, but I'm so grateful to have them back in my life that I really give high priority to those relationships. So I think that's those are the big things that I do.
Yeah.
I think another one of the takeaways, I guess I'll say it, anything that I missed, is one thing I'm learning is that recovery is a process. It's a process of continually turning things over in my life that separate me from God, that separate me from my recovery, that just because I got through that initial experience, that initial trauma, or that initial difficult period, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to encounter roadblocks, that life is going to be beautiful all the time. There's always going to be a challenge. However, I think the one thing that we have to take with us every day is that we do have the tools to face whatever it is, and that we've learned that. We can't forget that. And so I think it's an ongoing experience. It's never over. It's just, what's the next thing going to be? And, having that toolbox to pull out and to say, I can do this.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much for taking time and sharing your story. Such an amazing story, but really an incredible recovery, and the way that you were able to share how you have built the life that you have today is really inspiring. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.